الحمد لله حق حمده والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد خير أنبيائه ورسله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on the Tariqa al-Muhammadiyya of Imam al-Birgivi rahimahullah, this great manual of Taqwa, we are in the final investigations related to riya, to showing off. And we're looking, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, at a sensitive investigation, which is those matters that are between showing off and sincerity. And in order to understand this, in previous lessons, the author has given us a number of muqaddimat, of introductory investigations to help us to be able to distinguish between sincerity and insincerity. So number one, we have to understand the types of inspirations that we have. And that's one of the most important of life skills that the believer, the God-conscious Muslim, the seeker of Allah would have, which is to be able to distinguish what kind of inspiration is it. And we looked at that extensively. Secondly, to know that if we want to do the good, there are tricks of the Shaitaan. And that's what we looked at. 7 tricks of the devil to get us either not to act or delay acting, or to hasten to act, or to show off in the acting, or to be conceited in the acting, or to self-doubt in different ways of acting. And that's an important investigation that we can truly benefit from, inshallah. And if you're catching this, this is something that we are, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, you can find it on our YouTube channel, and both of those lessons, inshallah, we are blogging this weekend, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Okay, so after doing that, he says, so Imam al-Birgivi rahimahullah ta'ala tells us, فَإِذَا تَمَهَّدَتْ هَذِهِ الْمُقَدِّمَةِ فَلْنَشْرَعْ فِي الْمَقْصُودِ. If this introductory investigation is looked at, to be able to distinguish the types of inspirations, and number 2, to know the tricks of the devil, let's look at what we meant to do here. فَنَقُولُ. So let's say من المترددات بين الرياء والإخلاص, from the things that are between showing off, insincerity, والإخلاص, and sincerity, أن الرجل قد يبيت مع قوم فيقومون للتهجد. A person might be spending the night amongst a group of people who all get up at night for tahajjud, for night vigil prayer. كل الليل أو بعضه, whether all the night or some of the night. وهو ممن لا يقوم. Right? And he himself is not someone who spends the night in prayer. أصلا. أو يقوم قليلا. Or they get up, or he worships only a little at night, and they're doing more. من قليلا من قيامهم, in compared to their standing up at night. فإذا رآهم انبعث نشاطه للموافقة. But when he sees them spending all or much of the night in worship, he gets encouraged to do the same thing. حتى يزيد على معتاده, such that he does more than what he is normally accustomed to do. or حتى يزيد هو على معتاده. وكذلك قد يقع في موضع يصوم أهله تطوعا The same thing could happen in a circumstance where he's surrounded by people who are all fasting some voluntary fasts. فَيَنْبَعِثُ لَهُ نَشَاطُهُ فِي الصَّوْمِ. So he gets the urge to also fast. Right? You're making qiyam al-layl at the masjid, and you only had in mind that, I'm going to pray a few rak'ahs and get some rest, because next day you have soccer practice and this and that. But these guys are all praying extra. Is it sincerity or insincerity to do that? You are visiting Tarim, for example, and they have a habit that after the day of Eid, they fast the 6 days of Shawwal consecutively. You say, might as well just do it with them. Right? So you get the urge to do that. فَرُبَّمَا يَظُنُّ. So the person might imagine, right? أَنَّهُ رِيَاء. They might think that this is insincerity, because I'm doing it because they're doing it. وَأَنَّ الْوَاجِبَ تَرْكُ الْمُوَافَقَةِ. And that you might think that what's necessary is not to do what they're doing. وَلَيْسَ كَذَلِكَ. And that's not the case. عَلَى الْإِطْلَاقِ. That's not unconditionally the case. بَلْ لَهُ تَفْصِيل. Rather, it has some detail. What is the detail? Right? He'll explain. Right? Right? فإن كان نشاطه لزوال الغفلة بمشاهدة الغير وقد أقبلوا على الله تعالى وأعرضوا عن النوم والأكل أو لاندفاع العوائق والأشغال التي في بيته. If the vigor that one finds that caused them, just by, for example, by being with the righteous, due to, no longer be heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So you got inspiration by being with them, by seeing these people who had all turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through their standing in prayer or their fasting. And they're turning away from sleep, or you're giving up eating to dedicate themselves to fasting, for example. Or because you don't have the preventatives, right? Let's say normally there's all kinds of things you do on the weekend, but you're visiting one of the great cities of Islam and you're staying with some students of knowledge. There's no TV there. You don't have an internet connection, so you're not watching things online, this and that. These guys are sitting, reciting Quran. Right? Now, either you are inspired by their example, or the things that busy you, you're cut off from. Right? مثل تمكنه على فراش وثير, such as you normally sleep on a comfortable bed. أو تمكنه من التمتع بزوجته أو أمته, or by having the capacity to fulfill one's physical desires with one's spouse or أمة. أو المحادثة بأهله وأقاربه, or being able to to socialize and talk with one's family or one's relatives. أو الاشتغال بأولاده, or being busy with one's children. أو بحساب معاملته, or by doing accounting of one's business. أو لمفارقة النوم, or you just weren't able to sleep. Why? لِاسْتِنْكَارِهِ الْمَوْضِعِ, because it's in a strange place. You're not accustomed to where it is. You're used to sleeping in a particular way. أو بسبب آخر, or due to some other reason. فَيَغْتَنِمْ زَوَالَ النَّوْمِ, so one makes the most of the inability to, so one should make the most of, not being asleep. وَفِي مَنْزِلِهِ رُبَّمَا يَغْلِبُهُ النَّوْمِ, but at home you may be overcome by sleep because you have these comforts. وَقَدْ يَعْسُرُ عَلَيْهِ الصَّوْمِ فِي مَنْزِلِهِ, and it may be difficult for you to fast at home. Your spouse cooks wonderful fool mudammis every morning and you get tempted by it, so you don't fast because you have the fool and every morning. وَمَعَهُ أَطَيِّبُ الْأَطْعِمَةِ, because one has really nice things to eat. فَإِذَا أَعْوَزَتْهُ تِلْكَ الْأَطْعِمَةِ لَمْ يَشُقَّ عَلَيْهِ, but if one is away from these, from these foods, then the fast may not be difficult. فَهَذِهِ وَأَمْثَالُهَا لَيْسَتْ بِرِيَاءٍ, these things, either you being encouraged by the example of others, or the things that busy you away from the extra prayer, the extra fasting, the extra Quran, the extra dhikr. You're sitting with a group of righteous people in the masjid. You're sitting and you're surrounded by all these people. They all took their sibhas out. So you showed up early to the masjid. And you thought the prayer was 1:30, so you showed up because you're in the neighborhood. Now normally if there's no one around, you just grab your phone and you'd be there checking out your messages. Asim joined Telegram. Oh, cool. How are you doing, Asim? Right? But now there's all these religious people around, so they got their sibhas out. You have a sibha in your pocket. Normally you're just like spinning it around, but they're all making dhikr. So should you make dhikr too? Right? So making dhikr, and you realize, or your phone's not got any charge. Normally you just got on your phone for half an hour. Right? And as Ibn Ata'illah says, الحرمان كل الحرمان أن تقطع عنك العلائق ثم لا تتوجه إليه. That what a prevention that your attachments be removed from you, and yet you not turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your phone's off. What do? Turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People, of course, find any excuse. Let me go check out their washrooms, right? Let me see what kind of decor does this masjid have, right? So, in these situations, engaging in worship is not insincerity. فَعَلَيْهِ الْمُوَافَقَةِ, so there, one should do what the other people are doing. وَالْعَمَلِ, and to act. وَالشَّيْطَانُ عِنْدَ ذَلِكَ رُبَّمَا يَصُدُّ, and in this case, the shaitan may come to turn one away. وَيَقُولُ لَا تَعْمَلْ مَا لَا تَعْمَلْ فِي بَيْتِكَ, the shaitan may say, don't do what you don't normally do at home. فَتَكُونَ مُرَائِيًا, lest you be insincere, lest you show off. Right? وإن كان نشاطه طلبا لمحمدتهم خوفا من ذمهم, but if one's vigor, one's feeling of encouragement to do that action, to pray, to fast, to do the dhikr, they're making dhikr, they're like, they got sibhas, I got a sibha too. They look religious, I'm religious too. Right? So not only am I going to put on my sibha, I'm going to take out my cap. Why? It can apply to other things too. Religious dress. These people come, they're all wearing their kufis, and you weren't wearing your kufi. You're sweating, so you had it off. You see them, you're reminded, I have a kufi too. If you're reminded by their good example, putting on their your headgear, for example. Or some sisters come and they're wearing full hijab, and you're traveling in Cuba and someone had kind of done one of those cool hijabs, but you know that properly speaking, the hijab or an upper garment should be draped loosely over the upper half of the chest area for a woman, whether it be the head cover itself be covering the chest area, or one be wearing something else like whatever, some loose upper garment covering at least the full chest area. You see these ladies come. So should you do the same thing as well? Right? If you are reminded by them, or the preventatives are gone, is it insincere? No. What? And you ignore the prattle of the shaitan there. But if one's vigor is seeking their praise, the praise of the people who are praying at night, or those who are fasting, or those who are making dhikr, in all these examples, أَخَوْفًا مِّن ذَمِّهِمْ, or you don't want them to blame you. Then why is that guy asleep? Why is that guy not fasting? وَنِسْبَتُهُمْ إِيَّاهُ إِلَى الْكَسَلِ, unless they ascribe one to laziness. لا سيما إذا كانوا يظنون أنه يقوم الليل, especially if they imagine that you do pray at night. أو يصوم تطوعا, or they think that you're of the people who fast voluntary fasts. فلا تسمح نفسه بأن تسقط عن أعينهم, and your ego won't accept that you diminish in their eyes. فيريد أن يحفظ منزلته في قلوبهم, and one does what they're doing lest they think less of him. وعند ذلك قد يقول له الشيطان, and at that point the shaitan may say to one, صلي فإنك مخلص, pray because you're sincere. وإنما كنت لا تصلي في بيتك لكثرة العوائق, and you only didn't pray at home because you have all these things busying you. فلا يجوز له أن يزيد على معتاده. In that case, one should not do more than what one normally did. لأنه يعصي الله بطلب محمدة الناس, because one disobeys Allah if one seeks the praise of people. Right? What is insincerity? طلب الدنيا بعمل الآخرة, right? Seeking any worldly gain by a next worldly action. Correct? And the praise of people is worldly gain. Prayer, fasting, reciting Quran, dhikr, putting on religious gear like a cap, as religious gear is عمل الآخرة. أو دفع بطلب محمدة الناس أو دفع ذمهم, or to ward off their blame, because that's also a worldly gain. أو سقوط منزلته عندهم, or by seeking that they not think less of one in بطاعة الله تعالى, through an act of obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لأنه رياء محظور محض, because doing more than this, right? So what's the case? You realize that I I don't want to look bad in their eyes, or I want their praise. So that's what's driving you. Shaitan says, but you're sincere. Sincerity, what is sincerity? What's the definition of sincerity? What is sincerity, folks? Sincerity is إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ. It is you alone we are devoted to. Right? Sincerity is مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. إِنَّمَا أُمِرُوا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. They've only been commanded that they be devoted to Allah, making their acts of devotion, making their religious act solely for His sake alone. Right? لِلَّهِ الدِّينُ الْخَالِصِ. For Allah alone is sincere religion. فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Whoever's migration is for Allah and His Messenger alone, then their migration was indeed to Allah and His Messenger. What is sincerity? What is sincerity? We looked at a whole number of definitions of sincerity. Descriptively. Yeah. Yeah. So, ikhlas comes from the idea of khulus, of purity, right? So it is to singularize one's purpose in action from seeking any worldly gain or benefit. Right? But rather, أن يكون العمل طلبا لمرضاة الله سبحانه وتعالى. Right? That the action be ابتغاء مرضاة الله. Right? That we be seeking the good pleasure of Allah. Right? أن تقصد بعملك وجه الله تعالى دون معنى آخر. Is that you seek with your actions the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and no ulterior motive. So what's the safety? If you see the people praying, whether you are inspired by their example and reminded, or you find that I have the time too and there's an opportunity to do the good, or you're moved by ill intent, in both situations, safety is in turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. صدق التوجه إلى الله. Right? To turn to Allah. And the basis is that if you have an inclination to do the good, even if you have an ill intent driving you to do the good, stick to the intention of doing the good and get rid of the ill intent. Because if you try to go into strategic analysis with the shaitan, he'll outwit you. Said, well, I shouldn't do this good because my intention is mixed up. To the extent that you can, good, an inclination to do the good, but the reason for it is bad, do the good after correcting your intention. Unless you can't correct your intention there, right? Then, and you're not a person who has waswasa, you're not a person who has misgivings and stuff, then, so no, you are clearly driven by ulterior motives here, then you don't kid yourself, then just do what you would normally do. And we mentioned a safeguard against this is to commit to a standard of religious practice that you do privately and publicly, alone and with others. And you stick with it. Right? So how does one distinguish between a good inclination to do what other people are doing and a bad inclination? And he says, وَالْعَلَامَةُ الْفَارِقَ بَيْنَهُمَا أَنْ يُعْرِضَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ أَنَّهُ لَوْ رَأَى هَؤُلَاء مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ هَلْ كَانَتْ تَسْهُ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَالصَّوْمِ فَهُوَ إِخْلَاص. Right? عفوا. هؤلاء يصلون ويصومون من حيث لا يرونه. That how do you judge that this inspiration, being inspired by others or reminded by others or finding that I could do it too, is sincere or not? Is that if you imagine that if you saw those others praying or fasting or making dhikr or Quran, or they have caps on, that that they're doing these actions but they don't see you because they're behind a curtain, let's say, would you actually go forth and pray and fast or make dhikr or put on the cap or fix your hijab or whatever? Then that's sincere. فهو إخلاص يوافقهم يعني, and you're just doing what they're doing, but sincerely. أو لا تسخو وتثقل لعدم اطلاعهم عليها فرياء فلا يزيد على المعتاد. But if you find that if they don't see you, you wouldn't find it within you to do the extra prayer or extra fasting or the other extra actions, then you're motivated by showing off, by insincerity. You're seeking their praise, their approval, or you fear their blame, and that's insincerity. So, right? What's the safety? There's an inclination to the good. You pause, make your intention, and do it. If you can't find that within yourself, then try to struggle with the intention. Ask Allah, ask Allah, Ya Rabb, Allahumma inni as'aluka al-ikhlas. But the inclination should be, you get an inclination to go, do it. Unless it's obviously harmful for other reasons, right? Right? You also have to be aware of what you say and do and what drives it. So he says, وَمِن ذَلِكَ, and from that, الاستغفار والاستعاذة عند الناس. And from what could be between sincerity and insincerity is when you make istighfar or seek refuge. You make istighfar, you say astaghfirullah. Right? So someone mentions something sinful. Astaghfirullah. But are you doing it because you genuinely don't like hearing about the sin? Or you just like people seeing that you are religiously conscious? Isti'aza, a'udhu billah. Right? فَقَدْ يَكُونُ لِخَاطِرِ خَوْفٍ. This could be due to a consciousness of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَتَذَكُّرِ ذَنْبٍ, or because you remember the sin. وَتَنَدُّمٍ عَلَيْهِ, or regret and remorse for a sin. وَقَدْ يَكُونُ لِلْمُرَاءَةِ, and could be out of showing off. You want their praise. Right? فَرَاقِبْ قَلْبَكَ, so be vigilant over your heart. وَمَيِّزْ بَيْنَهُمَا, and distinguish between the inclinations. بِالْعَلَامَةِ السَّابِقَةِ, with the previous sign. That if they didn't see you, if they didn't hear you, is this what you would do? Is this what you would say? If it is, do it for Allah. If it's not, then the safety is in do what you would normally do. What's superior is istijma' an-niyya. Gather your intention and do what's right. وأمثالها يعني وأمثالها, right? فإن كان لله تعالى فأمضه, right? If it's for Allah, after you distinguish, are you doing it for Allah or are you doing it for the sake of people? Then go ahead. وإلا فاحذر. Otherwise, beware. ومن ذلك إظهار الطاعة. And from that is to manifest an act of obedience or devotion. فإن الباعث عليه قد يكون قصد الاقتداء. Right? To manifest an act of obedience. Right? There's a public event. You want to give the adhan. You've been working on your adhan. Right? There's a meeting of the Muslim leadership and community groups in your region, Peel region. So you want to give the adhan. You get the inclination, I want to do the adhan. Should you or not? There's tafsil. That this is an opportunity to do the good, what's moving you? There could be other good reasons, right? And the simple thing is it for Allah? So you say, you got the inclination to do the good? I want to do it for Allah. How is it for Allah? One of the reasons would be qasdul iqtida, that you be followed in the good, right? فَيَكُونُ أَفْضَلْ مِنَ الْإِخْفَاءِ. And that would be better than doing something privately. Or there's a large gathering and you're thinking about, so they're talking about donating $10,000. You could do it. You get the inclination. Should you do it quiet? You want to say, I'll give 10,000. What's safety? Make your intention for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Secondly, ask, how will I seek the pleasure of Allah by this? And multiply multiple intentions. As you raise your hand, this is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the fact that I'm doing it publicly, so other people are also inspired to do the good. Right? So that there can be greater benefit for these people. To set an example also for my children and others in this. And safety is, you turn to Allah. من علامات النجح في النهايات الرجوع إلى الله في البدايات. From the signs of success in endings. And endings is not just the end of life. Is that this action, because the action is done, when you raise your hand. Just pause for a moment. Say, Ya Rabb, oh Allah, make this for your sake. It sometimes helps to just utter the intention to yourself. Right? I intend with this act of charity to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that others be inspired to do the good. And oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from insincerity. You raise your hands. Right? And then you should, and you should remain between hope that this is sincere and fear of insincerity. So you turn to Allah, you keep turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you make istighfar. Quietly, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. And had it not been for that contingent consideration, you would have preferred to do it secretly. Right? رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا. Oh Allah, you accept from us. إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. Because you are the all-hearing and all-knowing. وَتُبْ عَلَيْنَا. And relent unto us. إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ التَّوَّابُ الرَّحِيمُ. And you are the one who accepts repentance and is all merciful. Right? He mentions a hadith. روى البيهقي عن ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: عمل السر أفضل من عمل العلانية. والعلانية أفضل لمن أراد الاقتداء. Right? That it's come from Ibn Umar that the Prophet ﷺ said, actions done privately are better than actions done publicly. But actions done publicly are better for the one who intends that others follow them in the good for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But he cautions, وَهَذَا لَا يَكُونْ إِلَّا فِي الْمُقْتَدَى بِهِ. This is only for one who would be followed, right, in the like of that matter. And he says, وَقَدْ يَكُونُ الْبَاعِث الرِّيَاء وَلَا يُلَبِّسْ يعني ولا ولإبليس تلبيس في كلا الجانبين. But what drives you could be insincerity. The reason why you're manifesting the action could be insincere, but the shaitan could drive you. And one of the things is that niyyah is intention, which is the vessel of sincerity, is what is it that's driving you to do the action. It's not the decoration you put around it afterwards. Right? Why am I doing this? Right? What, why, how? Right? These are the three questions related to the action. Right? What am I doing? But if it's so, the why, and that's why the first inclination of the intention. Zubayr is giving $100. Zubayr donated his goat in charity. Even though Zubayr wanted the goat for her mahar, you know, they're deciding to do a picnic. Auntie says, I'll make goat nahari. Zubayr says, I'll give the goat. So Hamza goes, man, that's the whole party. So Hamza says, I'll bring the dessert. What drove him to say that? The fact that Zubayr intended, he gave the goat. He says, Lillahi ta'ala. It's not what you said. He says, just say it for Allah. No. What is driving you? What is driving you? That's what, muhasaba is important. Intention is not just that decorative addition of Lillahi ta'ala. Right? There's a Muslim academic who said, we just learned at an Ivy League university, then we became religious, so we decided to get involved in Islamic, what they called the Islamization of the sciences. So what do you do? So it's simple. We put Bismillah in the beginning and Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen at the end. And we added Quranic verses here and there. That's decoration. Deen is what moves you, right? What moves you to the action, right? So the shaitan could deceive in both things, in both why you manifest something or why you hide it, right? How? You hide it. Zubayr gave publicly, you're like, Zubayr gave publicly. So you gave it quietly, but just let it be known. So you hid it, but you're showing it, right? That's worse. So he says, فَعَلَيْكَ التَّيَقُّظ. So be awake, right? فَعَلَيْكَ بِالْإِخْفَاء فَإِنْ اشْتَبَهَ. But if you're not clear, فَعَلَيْكَ بِالْإِخْفَاء فَإِنَّهُ لَا ضَرَرَ فِيهِ الْبَتَّةِ. And if you're unclear which way to go, then safety is in doing it secretly, as indicated in that hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. You don't know whether to do it publicly or privately, do it privately. The higher ground is, you can pause and ask what choice is going to be more likely to Allah, right? And then do it as best you can for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إلا أن يكون الإظهار واجبا, unless the manifesting is necessary. أو سنة كالجماعة, unless the manifesting is obligatory, like Salat al-Jumu'ah, or a sunnah, like congregation, sunnah mu'akkada. And from that also is, right, the sunnah, it's wajib or sunnah. You can put here aynan أو kifayatan. Right? Whether it's personally obligatory or personally sunnah, or collectively obligatory or sunnah, right? Right? Why? Because sometimes, let's say, you're at the masjid, right? And they urgently need to make a payment. And there's no way to do it privately at that moment. And it's in the fulfillment of a fard kifaya. So they say, I can do it. It's not personally obligatory to you to help repair the roof or whatever else. Let's say something's immediately required, right? You're accompanying the janazah to the graveyard and the masjid doesn't have the money to pay, and they say, we're not going to let you guys in until you pay. And you walk to the graveyard just down the road from the masjid. So we won't let the body in. Now, you don't have to pay for it. It's not personally obligatory. But, the person died alone. So that's a fard kifaya. But in all of these things, what's safety? Before you act, turn to Allah. And he says, وَمِن ذَلِكَ, and from the actions that are that are between sincerity and insincerity is التحدث بما يفعله من الطاعات بعد الفراغ وحكمه حكم إظهار نفسه إلا أنه إذا تطرق إليه الرياء لم يؤثر في فساد العبادة الماضية. Right? And from the things that are between sincerity and insincerity is to talk about some act of worship, some act of devotion that you did after completing it. And its ruling is like when you manifest a good deed, except that if you manifest a good deed during the deed, seeking the praise of others, it diminishes the reward of the deed itself or extinguishes the reward and can be even sinful, depending on the various cases. We looked at that. But if you talk about the action after it's done, the action, if it was done sincerely, so you prayed tahajjud sincerely, but then at Fajr you said, oh, last night I had such an amazing session of tahajjud. Does this talking about it affect the action itself? No. You have the full reward of the action, and this is the talking about it is a separate act. بل يكون تحديثه معصية جديدة. Rather, one's talking about it, meaning seeking the praise of others, would be a separate sin. Right? So talking, and of course he puts this in summary that talking about an act of good, if you're doing it, a simple equation is it for Allah or is it not for Allah? If it's for Allah, do it. How? Let's say you went to the Muslim Welfare Center and they're low on food. Let's say there's so many families in difficulty, so you gave $100. Now for you to go and talk about it, is it good or bad? Is it good or bad, folks? It depends on what your intention is. So safety is in always being considerate of your intention before you act. But if you get the inclination to mention it, even if you have an ill intent, you want people's praise, pause. Safety isn't not doing that, but better than just being safe is, and this causes the shaitan to despair. You had an ill intent. You went and gave to the Muslim welfare centers, you're not going to go tell people. So one of the ways of sort of swatting the shaitan is to take his inclination to this suggestion. Let me tell people, say, is this for Allah? No, but it can be. So you say, okay, Zayn's a generous guy. If I tell him, maybe he'll do it too. Say, so you make the intention, oh Allah, make this for your sake. Say, Zayn, subhanAllah, I went to the Muslim Welfare Center and they're short of funds right now. Right? So you do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to encourage someone else to do good, to intend nasiha, to intend i'ana ala al-khair. You intend to, so you multiply your good intentions of how you will seek the pleasure of Allah and how you will make this action pleasing to Allah. The shaitan gave you a bad inclination, but you flip it on him. But sometimes it may require adjusting the action. Why? For example, you went and donated to whatever charity, and then you came to the center. Now the nafs wants to celebrate right away. So you say, you know what? I think I could encourage others to do it, but let me figure out what's the best way to do it. Right? So when you make a resolve that I want to share with others the intention of good, which is not that I did it. Sometimes you may realize that no, the inclination, the good would be in making known that they need it. And one of the aspects of that, Abu Madian, what does he say? Al-mudda'i man ashara ila nafsihi. The claimant is the one who is pointing to themselves. Wal-mukhlis yushiru ila rabbihi wa ila al-khair. The sincere person is pointing to God and the good. So for example, you show up to class and you send a message that it's come to my attention that that the Muslim Welfare Center is in need of charity. If anyone's able to give, here's the thing. Or you mention it, but you don't have to say you did it. If if they're good people, they'll be inspired even if you didn't mention it, that I did it. So if it would be enough to say that subhanallah, and there's one of the scholars, one of the sort of da'is, was very active on the scene when I was at university, and he's still active on the scene. I saw at many fundraisers, he'd say, I'm going to give $1,000. And 28 years ago when I entered university, it's still quite a lot of money. Wondering why. But this leader, he would take large honoraria for his, but one of the things he may mention, he does this, he has the whole list of intentions why he takes, and whenever someone's in financial difficulty or whatever, he waives it. But one of the things is, so he always supports the cause for which he travels for. But So he travels, assists them in fundraising, but he contributes himself to the fundraising, but then he would support another cause that's like that cause, and he would support his own community. So he'd have like multiple good intentions. I was like, whoa. Right? Right? So safety is in when you're pointing to yourself, when it's for the self, it's ruin. When it's for God or the good, right? If it's just for the good, it's fine because there's a good meaning ultimately, but should for God and the good. And you multiply the intentions, many layers of good. So he says in summary, وبالجملة الإخفاء في العبادات التي لا يلزم إظهارها أفضل من الإظهار. And in summary, concealing acts of worship that one does not have to manifest is better than manifesting them. إلا عند التيقن, unless one is sure, بقصد التعليم, such as intending to teach others, والاقتداء, or for others to follow one in the good. فالإظهار حينئذ أفضل, and manifesting there is needed, but is better if that's the only way to fulfill the benefit. And that's something also, those are the kinds of things one consults one's teachers and mentors with. وقس على هذا أمثالها, and you can make analogy of other like examples to this, right? And then he talks about other tricks of the shaitan. So we'll stop here today. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا والحمد لله رب العالمين.